What if the man they warned her about wasn't the danger, but the doorway to her deepest freedom? What if the one they feared would break her was actually the one who would help her find herself? You never set out to become the myth whispered through hushed conversations, the story told with half-truths and raised eyebrows. Long before her eyes ever met yours, long before her friends turned your name into a cautionary tale, your life had already carved its lessons deep into your spirit. You weren't shaped by praise or applause. You were shaped by solitude, by standing on the edges, by refusing to become smaller just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. You didn't chase labels. You didn't need approval. But that unsettled people, so they named you before knowing you. The risk, the temptation, the beautiful disaster, the one she should run from. They decided your confidence was arrogance, your independence was isolation, your silence was danger. And you felt their judgment, not just in their words, but in their glances, their distance, the way they discussed your life like it was something to be avoided. But you walked tall through it all, not because you enjoyed being misunderstood, but because you refused to betray yourself just to be accepted. For years, you carried the quiet burden of being the outsider. You didn't play by rules written by fear. You didn't seek belonging in shallow approval. You walked through heartbreaks and longings not to become jaded, but to become wise. You knew what it felt like to be desired only in shadows, and what it felt like to be cast out when your truth made others uncomfortable. You knew the silence of being talked about, and the strength it took to keep walking anyway. And in that silence, your power was born. You turned your loneliness into grace, your longing into light. Your presence became a quiet storm. Your sexual energy evolved into something pure, not a performance, not a game, not a chase, but a grounded, radiant force. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable, and that scared them, because you didn't need permission to be who you were. You didn't hide. You didn't shrink. And in a world that teaches people to tame themselves for safety, your freedom looked like rebellion. You became the man her friends warned her about, not because you were harmful, but because you were free. And freedom terrifies people who are still chained by fear. So when your path crossed hers, your energy met her before your words did. She felt it. Something in her stirred. Not rebellion, recognition. But she had already been warned. Her friends had layered her heart with caution. They meant well. But they didn't see you. They only saw the echo of their own heartbreaks. They turned you into a story to protect her from something they had once felt. And the louder they warned her, the more curious she became. Because you didn't move like a warning. You moved like truth. Rooted, present. She watched the way you walked through rooms. The way your smile didn't seek approval. The way your eyes saw more than skin. The way you listened. The way you said what was real, even when it wasn't popular. She saw that you didn't chase her or try to impress her. You simply were. Fully. Unapologetically. And that felt like a breath of fresh air in a world full of masks. The warnings kept coming, but every caution was like a spark in her chest, lighting a fire of questions. Who was this man really? Why did he feel familiar? Why did her body lean in while her mind tried to pull away? You didn't try to win her. You gave her space. You let her come closer or stay distant. You didn't perform. You didn't argue with her doubts. Your silence held space. Your presence answered questions without words. She didn't fall for you out of rebellion. She moved toward you because she felt safe enough to explore what her own heart was telling her. And still, her friends kept warning her. They called you the storm, the mistake, the thrill that ends in pain. But what she saw was something different. She saw how you handled gossip with grace, how you responded to pressure without losing your peace, how you stood still when others tried to shake you. And slowly, the fear they gave her started to fade. She didn't run into your arms. She walked, slowly, as she shed the voices that didn't belong to her. And with each step, her spirit grew louder than their fears. In your company, she didn't feel like she was breaking rules. She felt like she was breaking free. She laughed deeper, stood taller, spoke more boldly. Not for you, but because she was remembering herself. You didn't pull her in, you invited her. And that's what made it real. You gave her the kind of presence that didn't need to be earned, the kind of desire that didn't demand, the kind of love that didn't suffocate. You let her ask hard questions. You didn't hide from her fears. You didn't flinch when she told you about the doubts that still whispered in her mind. You let her be exactly where she was. And in return, she trusted you, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, because your energy never lied to her. Your truth never changed with the room. You didn't shape yourself to fit her story. You let her meet you as you are. And in that, she found her own power. What once looked like danger became clarity. What once felt like a risk became a return. And what her friends once called reckless, she began to call real. They thought they were protecting her from you. But what they didn't know was that you were the one man who didn't want to control her, silence her, or make her smaller. You were the one man who made room for her to breathe, to burn, to become. And even though the warnings never fully stopped, their power did. Because she stopped asking the world for permission to feel what she felt. She stopped living by other people's stories. She stopped shrinking her own voice for the sake of keeping others comfortable. She looked into your eyes and saw a mirror, not of who she had been told to be, but of who she was finally becoming. And you, chosen one, held it all with steady hands. You didn't use her trust to prove anything. You didn't weaponize her vulnerability. You honored it. You met it with presence, with reverence, with the patience of a man who had earned his strength the hard way. You became the grounding force in her becoming, not the man who rescued her, but the man who reminded her that she never needed saving. Together, you didn't hide in the shadows. You didn't shout it from rooftops either. You just lived it, quietly, powerfully. Two souls choosing each other, not in spite of the risks, but because of them. Two people building something sacred in a world that still doesn't understand the kind of love that comes from truth. And now, what once looked like taboo is beginning to look like freedom. What once felt like danger is now the doorway to something deeper. What once was feared is now the force that brought her home to you and to herself. Because sometimes the greatest threat isn't the man they warned her about. It's the part of her that finally dared to listen to her own soul. With you, She discovered that desire wasn't something to feel ashamed of, it was sacred. It wasn't a trespass or a mistake. It was a prayer, a deep call for more life, more truth, more connection. Being with you taught her that longing didn't mean weakness. It meant she was fully alive. You made her feel safe to want, to need, to be open. And in your presence, she learned that her yearning was not a burden, but a sign of her awakening. Your nights together weren't just filled with intimacy, they became rituals. Every touch, every sight, every silence you shared was filled with meaning. These weren't just moments of pleasure, they were acts of presence. You chose to be with her fully, not halfway, not with apologies or conditions, but with your whole heart. And she responded by offering you the same. It was mutual, it was real, and it was free from performance. She was never your conquest. You didn't choose her to rebel. You chose her because you saw her, because you honored her. You treated her like an equal, not someone to fix or possess. You walked beside her through the unknown, curious about what the two of you could become together when you dropped the fear and spoke from your hearts. You didn't hide her in the shadows. You didn't demand that she prove her love by walking away from people who mattered to her. You didn't pressure her to explain herself. You gave her space. You gave her encouragement. You told her it was okay to let your love be seen, and it was just as okay if she wanted to keep it sacred and quiet. You didn't try to control how the world saw you. You just wanted her to feel free to be who she was, loved, whole, and safe. You saw her journey as her own. You never tried to rescue her or become her escape. You simply stood beside her as she found the strength to face life with more courage. And sometimes that meant watching her struggle. Sometimes that meant holding space while old doubts crept back in. Sometimes her friends reminded her why they were afraid of someone like you, someone too bold, too passionate, too outside the lines. But you didn't take it personally. You remembered what it felt like to silence your own heart for the sake of being accepted. You knew how it felt to be called too much, too dangerous, too intense. And so, instead of pulling away, you leaned in. You loved her more, not to keep her, but to lift her, not to prove yourself, but to offer her a foundation where she could rise in her own time, in her own way. Without realizing it, your relationship became a quiet revolution. It showed others what was possible when two people stopped pretending and started living from the truth. You didn't try to convince anyone. You didn't make speeches or defend your love. You just lived it. And some of her friends, watching from a distance, began to see something different. They noticed how gently you held her, how you never overshadowed her, but helped her shine. They saw how you didn't need to dominate the story. You let the love between you speak for itself. Some of them softened. Some of them stayed skeptical, but they could no longer deny the joy on her face, the light in her eyes, the strength in her walk. And your love began to overflow into every part of life. It wasn't hidden in the corners anymore. It showed up in how you walked together, how you spoke to each other, how you moved through the world. You weren't the man they feared. You became the man whose love gave her wings. And she wasn't the woman who needed saving. She was the woman who had learned to choose for herself. The warnings became background noise. You both knew what was true. There were days you walked through the city hand in hand, feeling the sun on your skin, feeling eyes watching you. And the stares didn't matter anymore. She didn't shrink away. She didn't check behind her to see who might be watching. She stopped letting fear dictate how she showed up. The connection between you was grounded, soft, unshakable. You had fought for it, and now you lived inside of it. Every look, every small gesture between you was a quiet act of defiance, a celebration of love that refused to fit inside the limits others tried to place on it. The passion between you became a sacred fire, not just about the body, but about life itself. It made even the most ordinary moments shimmer with meaning, laughing over breakfast, holding hands in silence, dancing with no music in the kitchen. Your connection had once been called dangerous, but now it felt like home. It was a sanctuary. It was holy. You had crossed the invisible line between hiding and being fully alive. As time passed, she began to speak more boldly. Her confidence grew. She took chances she once would have been afraid to take. She began to help others step into their power too. And you stood by, not needing to control her journey, but cheering for her, protecting the sacred space where she could expand. She became radiant, not because you made her so, but because you loved her in a way that allowed her to rediscover her own light. She stopped letting fear guide her, and your pride in her ran deep. Quiet, respectful, tender. You didn't need to be the center of her story. You just wanted to be the one who held her hand, while she became everything she was always meant to be. The journey wasn't always smooth. Sometimes, those old voices still rose up. Sometimes, people still questioned the love you shared. But you no longer let those doubts shake your foundation. You faced them together. You didn't avoid hard conversations. You met them with honesty, with openness. And every time you did, your bond deepened. You learned that intimacy wasn't something you arrive at, it was something you commit to over and over again. A living process of meeting each other again and again, right where you are. Your sexual energy flowed through it all. Not just during intimate moments, but in the quiet ways you looked at each other, in the laughter that filled your home, in the confidence you brought out in one another. It was a source of renewal, of healing, of inspiration. It wasn't about ownership or display. It was about being fully alive together, again and again. In each moment you shared, you realized the greatest risk wasn't loving too fiercely. It was holding back out of fear. She hadn't fallen for you because others said not to. She chose you because your presence woke her up, because being with you made her feel more herself than she ever had before. And your love stopped being about rebellion and started being about truth. You weren't dangerous. You were honest. You were real. And that's what made your story powerful. That's what made it a quiet kind of revolution. As the weeks turned to months, the fear others tried to plant in her heart faded into the background. The woman who once hesitated now walked beside you with strength. She had tasted fear and freedom, and she kept choosing freedom. The change in her was deep, and the way you two related to each other shifted too. You created a rhythm, a life, a way of being that honored your love in daily, grounded ways. No dramatic speeches, no performances, just consistency. just presence, just the joy of being real. You created a home in each other, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. You didn't run from conflict. You welcomed the truth. You created space for growth. You found new ways to play, to explore, to rest. You let each other be human. And through it all, you kept choosing each other. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Her friends still had mixed feelings. Some kept their distance, but others started to notice. They saw how she had changed, how peaceful she seemed, how strong. A few even came to her for advice. They wanted to know how she'd found that kind of clarity, that kind of courage. And when she felt ready, she told them. She didn't blame anyone. She didn't speak against their warnings. She just shared her experience. That choosing her desire didn't destroy her. It made her whole. That listening to her truth didn't lead to chaos. It led to peace. She had trusted herself, and that trust had led her home. You watched her become an example, a light, and your pride grew deeper still. You didn't need recognition. You didn't need to be understood by everyone. You just knew what you had was real. And the love between you spoke louder than any defense ever could. You, too, had grown. You had become softer, wiser, more grounded. Your strength no longer looked like rebellion. It looked like devotion. Your freedom no longer looked like danger. It looked like presence. And people felt that. They didn't always have the words for it, but they saw it. They felt it.